If you ever feel out of control around food, you're not alone, and you're in the right place to learn practical, no-nonsense information about why you binge and how to stop. Binge eating does not mean that something is wrong with you. It's a natural but primitive brain response that you can correct. If you're ready for change, sign up for the Brain Over Binge self-paced online course for less than $20 per month. And if you feel you need personalized support, we also offer one-on-one coaching and group coaching. To learn more, go to brainoverbinge.com/subscribe. And I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the Brain Over Binge podcast, where you learn a simple, brain-based approach to ending binge eating. I'm Kathryn Hansen, and I'm happy to be back for another show. I love to share ideas and information with you in order to support you on your path to freedom from bulimia, binge eating disorder, or any form of binge eating. If you're a regular listener, you know that I also love to bring people on the show to contribute their own insights and what they've learned along the way, because everyone's path to recovery and to healing is different, and you can gain so much valuable knowledge by hearing other people's stories, and it can also help you realize that you are not alone. Today I'm going to be talking to Marcus Kain, and Marcus is an anxiety and trauma-informed nutrition coach and personal trainer. Marcus and I got in touch a while back on Instagram, and he shares extremely helpful content there, and I've linked to his Instagram in the show description. In this episode, we're going to be talking about a variety of recovery issues, and especially about letting go of the idea that you need to solve everything in your life in order to be free of an eating disorder. He brings a unique perspective that I know you'll find useful and inspiring. I do want to let you know beforehand that in our conversation, we talk about body image and also about the diet and fitness industry and some of the unhealthy practices going on there. And we even get into talking about the widespread use of performance-enhancing drugs in the fitness industry. And although we discuss all of this from the perspective of helping you have a better understanding so that you can develop a healthier mindset surrounding your body and weight, and so that you can stop unhealthy behaviors, we do understand that some of you may be sensitive to conversations about dieting and fitness. If that's the case for you, you may want to come back to this episode at another time, but I think this conversation with Marcus is an important one, and it's much needed, especially at a time when we're approaching the new year and people's attention will inevitably turn toward weight loss diets and getting into shape. It can be easy to be swayed by weight loss marketing and fitness trends, but to let go of your struggle with food, it's important to develop awareness about how the dieting and fitness industries often promote unrealistic and unsustainable practices. It's important to learn to resist harmful messages about getting the perfect body and instead learn to focus on taking care of yourself and your health and living your best life in an authentic way. And that's what Marcus helps people do. So I'll go ahead and share that conversation now. Welcome to the show, Marcus.
Thank you so much for having me, Kathryn.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're here, and I just think this conversation is going to be very helpful for people. To get started, I'd love for you to tell the listeners more about what you do as far as your nutrition and coaching practice and how you help people who are struggling with food issues.
For sure. So essentially, the bulk of my nutrition experience comes from a very long time in the fitness industry and my own experiences. And, a lot of people slip through the cracks in the fitness industry. So people struggling with disordered eating, anxiety, or even people with histories of trauma, find a lot of popular approaches to food and exercise don't really work for them. So I help people navigate food and fitness kind of with those things in mind, like things like variations in training intensity and volume. They often need adjusting, as well as like the way we approach food for anyone who's under a lot of pressure or has a history of disordered eating. So essentially, with my fitness industry experience, but also being trauma informed and disordered eating informed, I change the variables for people and actually make things more achievable, because I know for myself, when I was struggling with disordered eating, struggling with some anxiety, when there was a lot of pressure on me, the information that I was getting from the fitness industry, or maybe what we could call the popular fitness industry, just the information that everyone hears and that we all have a lot of access to, so many things I felt let me down. So many programs and kind of principles and teaching practices kind of promised the world, but I didn't feel like I could sustain them. So I work specifically with people who are struggling with certain things now to adjust all the variables and make sure that they get a good experience out of their journey, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate. The fitness industry sometimes can feel like a one size fits all approach and you try it and it ends up causing all these problems in your life. I know that was my experience. It's like, okay, just cut calories and exercise more. And then suddenly you're dealing with anxiety and stress and food obsessions and weight obsessions. And it just makes everything worse. So I love that you try to tailor it to each individual and to help people, still work on their health while not exacerbating their issues with food and also protecting their mental health too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly it. That's what we do.
Yeah, awesome. And I'd love for you to get into some of your own story. And I know you share a full version on your podcast. This is a great episode. I'm going to link it in the show notes just to hear more detail about what you've been through and how you overcame it. But I think for this show, it would be really helpful to share just a brief version about how you struggled with bulimia, binge eating disorder, or body dysmorphia, and how you overcame that.
For sure. So the ball really got rolling for me in a big way when I started getting body composition tests as a 14-year-old, when I became a bit more interested in high school sport. So I got a bit competitive. I wasn't exactly the example of the best possible athlete in the world at 13 or 14 years old. Like, I wasn't super big, I wasn't super mature at that age or whatever, but I was thrown into this situation where I was competing with guys who were, often 1, sometimes 2 years older than me. So I started to take my fitness very seriously with the best intentions. My mum got me off to a naturopath, but this guy put me through some body composition tests and all that kind of thing. And at that age, I just wasn't really equipped to understand certain things about that process or deal with it very well. So it very quickly became all about the aesthetic. It went from being about school sport to having a really low body fat percentage. And that just escalated. It really just picked up momentum. And because as a guy, like the guys that I was looking up to as far as, athletics and physiques and everything like that, so many of them, the vast majority of them, if not all of them, when I look back, were using performance-enhancing drugs. They were using steroids. All the guys who I was looking at and going, wow, I want to be like that. I want to look like that. In hindsight, now with, 20 plus years of experience in the industry, like, I'm going, okay, so all the people that I was looking at and kind of wanting to be like as a 14-year-old were using steroids. And, there was zero transparency about steroid use, at that time. It was all just, magazines and books and everything like that. And yeah, I just kept working harder and harder because I never felt like I was actually reaching those targets. Like, I didn't feel like I was making progress towards the physiques that I was seeing and who I wanted to look like and who I wanted to be like. Also, there was this huge discrepancy and this massive emphasis put on the value of how we look physically, especially once I kind of went down the fitness industry rabbit hole and the fitness model kind of rabbit hole. Like, I got my kind of priorities all mixed up. And I'm sure anyone who's been down that road or has a bit of experience there, like, maybe knows that in that arena, like, how we look physically is just blown out of proportion as far as importance is concerned. And, you start picking apart your body and looking at all these things. Oh, this doesn't look quite right, or that doesn't look quite right. And it all just kind of kept escalating from this perspective of looking at these guys who were using performance-enhancing drugs, myself not quite measuring up, and then constantly asking myself day after day after day, what do I need to do to actually get that result? And, it got to the point where, I was juggling work in the music industry and the fitness industry. I loved both and I didn't want to give up either. So I was doing them both for a very long time. And yeah, I got to the point where I started using performance enhancing drugs myself for a while to kind of keep up with the workload of working in the gym early in the morning, then going to like band rehearsals really late at night and touring and flights and all that kind of stuff. And I just reached a point where I was like, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. This is just ruining me. Like, yeah. And that's when, your book, Kathryn, like, yeah, your amazing book was one of the things that I read during that time. And it was one of the things that brought my attention to, how our minds work and how our brain works in regards to these things. And I was able to eventually, once I'd learned enough really hard lessons, I guess, to take the experience I had in the music industry with dealing with stage fright and actually transfer that into taking a better look at my urges to binge eat and, where they were coming from. And then from my study and experience with strength and conditioning training, actually looking at things from a more athletic perspective rather than looking at things from the perspective of, someone who's just aiming to have, a six-pack and biceps, so there was definitely a few layers to the road out of that process. But in a nutshell, I guess, it's still quite a long-winded nutshell, but that's kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really inspiring, and I know people can relate to just kind of going down that rabbit hole of focusing on your body and how you look and looking up to unrealistic role models. Like, it's interesting because as a woman, like, you see another version of unrealistic role models. Maybe their pictures are being photoshopped. Maybe they're having surgeries. So it's interesting to hear, that male perspective when you're looking up to these guys and you think this is something that's attainable. Yeah, I can see how that just, it's just really hard. And I think it's inspiring that you overcame it and using, what you learned about anxiety and overcoming stage fright and to transfer that to your urges to binge and obsessions around food. I think it's just so interesting how the brain works and how you have urges, you have desires, obsessions, but you can learn to kind of step back from that and not follow those anymore and just turn your life around.
Absolutely. Yeah. And something that's really interesting might be worth mentioning as far as female body image and everything like that. Some people might be interested to know that more and more female athletes and models are also using performance-enhancing drugs. It's really common now in male and female athletes, and our typical expectation of the results of steroids might be that kind of Arnold Schwarzenegger style, like bodybuilder look. But, there's such a wide scope of performance-enhancing drugs that can be used for so many different things that, yeah, it's really hard to tell if people are using them now. And a lot of women are using them now too, to maintain certain physiques that just would not be maintainable without them.
That's so interesting because when I started my own struggle as a teenager, like you did, the physique that was more in was that thinner frame. And now I think for women, it's become like that more curvier, muscular, like small waist, but strong muscles. And again, like not everyone can achieve that. So I think it's helpful for listeners to hear that it's not necessarily natural. These women who are on the covers of these magazines and things may also be using some of these performance enhancing drugs, and you can't expect your own body to do these things. I appreciate you sharing that.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So today we're going to focus on a certain topic. We're going to focus on the idea that you need to solve all of your other issues in your life in order to stop an eating disorder. And this is something that I talk a lot about in my book. And we just kind of want to dispel that idea today that you have to fix everything in order to stop the binging, the purging, the dieting. I do want to say here before we dive into this is that recovery is an individual thing. And if you personally feel like there's something you need to solve to recover, then we're not saying that you can't do that. I mean, everyone is different. You may feel like there's something you need to work on before you work on the binging. And I actually have an episode that addresses this a bit. It's episode 15. It's called Readiness for Recovery. So if you do want more information, you can go listen to that episode, which I'll also link in the show description. And Marcus, I know you feel this way as well, that the idea that you have to fix your whole life and you have to learn to cope with all of your emotions and you have to heal all of the issues from your past, this idea can really feel overwhelming. And because it's so overwhelming, it can kind of turn people away from even trying to recover because it does feel so daunting, especially when you're struggling daily with the urges to binge and purge and restrict food. So can you just talk about this and maybe how this idea personally affected you and how you see it affecting others?
For sure. Yeah, I spent a lot of years in therapy, kind of back and forwards between, therapists and dietitians, and just trying to pick apart why I was the way I was and what was driving me to do the things that I was doing. And I found it to be very confusing and very overwhelming. And I didn't feel like there was a lot that I could really, excuse the pun, but sink my teeth into in a really practical sense to kind of help the rubber to meet the road and make some progress. I felt that the things that I was talking about in therapy, and obviously different therapists are different and some are better than others and all that kind of stuff. But the stuff that I found myself chatting about in therapy, I found to be very esoteric. And, there weren't many things that I felt that I could action as a result of my therapy. I didn't really walk away from therapy sessions with action steps, with things that I felt like, okay, this is a tangible thing that I can do this week to make a few steps in the right direction. There was a lot of reframing and there's a lot of interesting conversation and a lot of insight for sure, but that didn't really change the way I felt driven to act around food. So I think if I was trying to do things in terms of healing myself completely first before dealing with my relationship with food, I would not only still have an eating disorder, but the other stuff would be moving along at a snail's pace as well. I don't think I'd be aware enough of what was going on in me, like while dealing with the eating disorder, in order to really see things clearly. Like the bulimia was taking up so much time and energy that it didn't really allow me to get a proper look at the other stuff that was going on in me, because it was just so all-consuming, and it was just so easy to say at any given time that bulimia is the reason that I feel this way, and bulimia is the problem that I have, and everything like that. And it was so difficult to move past that, and so difficult to see past that, because it was just so all-consuming that really doing things this way around, it was my kind of only shot, because it just wasn't going to work the other way.
Yeah, I can for sure relate to that. I mean, it's so hard to kind of see the rest of your life when you're so consumed with your struggle with food. So when my therapist would tell me, like, you have to fix your anxiety and your depression and things like that. But I felt like the bulimia was the thing creating a lot of the anxiety, a lot of the depression. So it almost helps to clear that out of your life. And then if there's something else you need to work on after, or at the same time, everyone is different, then you can do that. But feeling like you have to fix that fully in order to stop binging, I think, I feel like you, like I would still be binging if I still believed that.
Yeah. It just comes down to that thing, like, it'd still be struggling with food, whether or not that approach, and everyone's so unique in so many ways. And for sure, dealing with things the other way around definitely works for some people, though I can put up my hand and definitely say that without dealing with my eating disorder, I wouldn't have had the clarity and the space in my life to look at other things.
Yeah, totally. Something else I want to address, you mentioned going to therapy, and I think it's really helpful to have a male perspective on this. And I know men and women struggle with many of the same things in recovery, but I think considering the unique experience of men is important. And something I want to address is that it's been common for boys to be raised to not talk about their feelings, to not talk about their emotions. And then in therapy, kind of the commonly recommended treatment for an eating disorder includes things like talking about your feelings a lot and getting in touch with your emotions and learning to cope with those emotions. And I think it can be maybe not appealing to men, or it can be really difficult for men to do that and think that's the cure. Maybe just talk about this, and if you see that in other men you've worked with.
Yeah, it's actually something that I see as a super common thing in guys, and even with quite a number of the women that come to see me. But, for guys, like, we're given high fives for suppressing our emotions from a very young age. Like it's something that's kind of tied up in our identity and our value as men, even though more and more it's like publicly a spotlight is being shone on men's mental health, and we're told that you need to talk about it, and we're told that you should acknowledge feelings and all that kind of stuff. But, saying that, and then the male population actually feeling that are two kind of separate things. Like in theory, we know that talking about it is going to be like, we'll be better off. But so many of us are still so uncomfortable with that process, and it's just going to take a bit of time for that to happen. And the idea of getting in touch with our feelings in the way that it's often talked about, for sure, isn't very appealing to men, and we could unpack that box for days. But something that I've found to be really, really helpful is talking about emotions from the physiological perspective. So, really talking about what happens in the body in response to certain emotions, so it's a bit less talking about our feelings and a bit more talking about, okay, what are you experiencing in the body? On a physiological level, what is happening in the body when we experience anxiety? What is happening to the nervous system? What might be bringing about that, or what might be triggering it? What kind of events lead to that physiological sensation? And then what steps can we take to mitigate or manage that sensation, change the situation in our body so that we can begin to move past it and develop good kind of management strategies for those different emotions. And I've found the people that I chat with, of course, I'm not a therapist, so I'm very careful about my scope of practice. As a coach, I can talk about, mindfulness, I can talk about breath, I can talk about all these kinds of things that we can do right now in the present moment. But something that is almost like a little bit of a gift is that I'm not a therapist, so I'm not going to be digging around in someone's past, asking about how they feel about something. It's very much like, what physical sensation are you experiencing right now? Can you describe that physical sensation? What's your breathing like right now? Like bringing it into the body in the present moment can really give us some great tools for management and moving through these things, and without feeling like we have to, describe your feelings or sit in a sharing circle or anything like that. Not that there's anything wrong with that kind of stuff, but certain conversations about feelings will make men or just make certain people run for the hills. While I've found that for myself and quite a few other people, really bringing it into the present moment in the body can be a really good stepping stone.
I think that's so helpful, that physiological perspective of like, okay, this is what's going on in your body, in your brain, and it just kind of normalizes it. Otherwise, you think, oh my gosh, something's wrong with me. I'm broken. And I think too, for men or even anyone who has trouble talking about their emotions, and like you talked about the sharing circle or trying to dig into your past, it can just be a lot to try to overcome while you're struggling with that eating disorder. Like you have to overcome not only, your food issues, but your hesitancy to share, that whole socio-cultural upbringing and conditioning to not share your feelings. And then suddenly you have to overcome that and the urges to binge. I just think it can feel like a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's like all of a sudden there are a lot of layers of discomfort right there. There's a lot of barriers, and it's a lot. That's a lot to deal with in one go. So yeah, for sure, I agree.
Yeah. And again, everyone's different, but I think peeling back the layer of bulimia, getting the binging out your life can just open you up to making so many other changes. And those changes are going to be different for everyone. But once you have freedom from that, you're so much more clear to work on other things.
Yeah. And in the same way that dealing with stage fright as a pro musician helped me to understand the principles of moving through urges to binge, the skill set that we develop, I think you've mentioned this before, and I was like, yes, absolutely. The skill set that we develop from learning to manage these urges and kind of move through them is something that we can then use moving forward when we want to look at other things.
Yeah, I totally agree. Something else I want to address is we're talking about emotions and feelings, and we're definitely not saying you should just ignore those things. And we're definitely not saying you should ignore other problems in your life. But like I said, if I still thought anxiety and depression and perfectionism made me binge, then I might still be binging. But I've realized that, I do have some of these tendencies and I work on them, but it doesn't have to have a bearing on my relationship with food. I've been binge free for 16 years now. And I guess the point here is that we don't want you putting off recovery. We don't want you delaying having freedom around food because you're waiting to become this ideal version of yourself. And I personally believe that even if you do become that ideal version of yourself, you'd still have to deal with breaking the habit, like breaking the harmful food behaviors that are just wired into your brain. So I'm wondering if you can talk about where you are today as far as maybe still struggling with some personal issues, but then eating normally in spite of that.
For sure. So once the fog and preoccupation with food and body image started to be cleared out of the way, I was able to see with a lot more clarity the issues and the struggles with anxiety that I have. And it's something that I've been consciously working on or managing, moving through, whichever way we want to put it, for quite a while now. And I'm making some really great progress. And when I was binging, when I was purging, when I was overtraining, I was dissociating so much through my relationship with food, through overtraining, through all these different things that I just didn't really, I couldn't see the forest for the trees, and underlying all of that is this kind of like refrigerator noise level anxiety. And, when I talked about at the very start what I help people with their training volume and food in regards to their fitness goals and nutrition and everything like that, things like anxiety can really mess with a physical training program if you're not quite sure how to program around it, because it's a stress on the nervous system that and training and exercise, especially if you're lifting heavy, if you're doing that kind of thing, that's also a stress on the nervous system. So someone with a really secure attachment style and no triggers, and someone who's done the work or is just very blessed in that sense, their training schedule and training program will rarely be interrupted, because whether we want to say their emotions are in a good place or their nervous system is in a good place, whichever way you want to say that. Whereas, someone who's struggling with anxiety, we might experience days where, there's a couple of triggers that we may have missed or might not be aware of, and all of a sudden we're feeling kind of lit up from the inside out. We've got that physiological sensation of anxiety going, and before we know it, our energy levels start to dip. And as our energy level dips, then we're more susceptible to certain thoughts, certain moods. Obviously our energy levels are lower. We don't feel able to exercise and train maybe in the way that we usually would. So all these things play into each other so much, and it's something that I'm able to work on now and still am working on, in the sense of how to not just manage anxiety, but how to kind of reprogram that anxiety, but not put my whole life on pause while I do it, if that makes sense. So really dealing with that now, and really kind of looking at that now and dealing with it from that bottom up approach, from like dealing with that from paying attention to the body and working with the body, rather than just dissociating or pushing the body really, really hard no matter what's going on. Yeah, that's something that is definitely happening now. And, I'm halfway through the journey. I'm still in the middle of it, though that experience allows me to be right there and kind of help other people in that situation, which I'm grateful for. So that's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, what comes to mind for me is I think that a fitness coach or trainer, there's this stereotype of them pushing you and just like making you do things that you don't want to do. And I just think that the way you're coming at it is you're like this kind influence, and you're motivating the person. And also, I don't know if I'm explaining that well, but it's just flipping the whole model around. And I love that, because really, like, someone pushing you, and even you pushing yourself. For me, I was a runner, and I think that with my personality style and tendency toward anxiety, I think it was probably the worst thing for me. I mean, just to constantly push myself every day to go faster and faster and faster. And it was just too much on my nervous system. And I find that today, like, I do so much better with like gentle exercise and not really pushing myself. It's just the way I know myself. And I look at other people and they're really pushing themselves, and that's great. It may work for them, but everyone is so different. So I love that you bring that individuality to this.
Thank you. It's funny, the kind of ground floor commercial fitness industry loves to promote this, just push hard and grind and rah, 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 and all that kind of stuff. And that message is pushed a lot because I guess it's kind of exciting and it's a very simple message. But the reality of effective training and exercise, we can learn a lot from elite athletes, in the sense that more is not always better. We're going to need to factor in central nervous system recovery and like all these other things. And if you were to look at the way an Olympic coach trains an athlete that is their country's best chance at a gold medal, they're not going to be going into every single training session going, yeah, just kick it like as hard as you can. Let's do this. Go, 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 go. No, they're going to have like charts and graphs and numbers and records to know, exactly what needs to be done in each training session to hit somewhere between minimum recoverable volume and maximum recoverable volume in a way that allows that athlete to get the best out of that session and then recover and do another great session the next day and the next day and the next day. And that's just not something that we get from approaching every workout with this just go, go, go mentality that a lot of us are led to believe is the way to do it.
Yeah. It makes me sad, like how many good athletes have kind of been ruined by that mentality. I mean, I'm definitely one of them, and I knew many collegiate athletes back then. I went to college in the early 2000s, late 90s, and the mentality was different. And I'm glad that it feels like it's coming around to work out smarter, not necessarily harder, but I think that message is kind of slow catching on.
It's very slow. There's a lot of factors there, I guess, because the push, push, push kind of hustle mentality is still very marketable. It's very exciting, I guess. And the people who that works for, they love shouting about it and they will shout about it. And we just need to remember that just because a select group of people who are very noisy are yelling very loud about what works for them, it doesn't mean that it's going to work for the rest of us. So it's just really necessary to keep that stuff in mind.
Absolutely. And you don't know, even if it is working for them at this point, what's going to happen down the road. For a while, both of us probably were very successful on the outside as far as body type and fitness level. But then what happened to us? We ended up binging and purging and in this horrible cycle that was extremely unhealthy.
Yeah. More athletes and influencers, models, like actors, whoever, like more people who have that outer appearance of whether we want to use the word perfection or whatever, more of them are struggling with these things than any of us would realize. I used to be around a lot of fighters, a lot of MMA guys, a lot of boxers, and now Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is getting super, super popular. And yeah, a huge number of those guys, despite how hard they are on the outside with what they do and what they present to the world, huge numbers of them are struggling with food and with any number of things behind closed doors. Once you get to know them and once you're kind of in that world, the number of people struggling is much, much higher than we realize.
Yeah, I think any sport that requires a certain body type automatically puts you at risk. And that leads me into the next thing I want to talk about, which is kind of the last issue that we're going to cover today, is that we've been talking about not needing to solve everything, but you kind of need to look at this body image thing, because really to recover from binging and food issues, you have to be able to eat enough. You have to be able to nourish your body. You can't keep starving yourself. You can't keep putting your body through these restrictive cycles. So one way to overcome that is to look at these unrealistic standards and to look at how you think about your body. So it's often becomes really necessary to drop these unattainable standards for yourself. And I've had women talk about this on the show before, but I think, again, it's important to have this male perspective. And culturally, there are different set of stereotypes, like we talked about earlier, for men and women based on what's considered ideal in this culture. So can you talk a little bit about how you personally let go of some of these unrealistic standards for this perfect male body, or how that should look, and how that has helped you on your journey, and how that helps others to let go of those unrealistic standards for your body?
For sure. I guess one of the most helpful things that I found or that I picked up over the years was becoming really, really informed on the telltale signs of steroid use and performance-enhancing drug use. So these are just things that I've picked up over the years and I've just accumulated knowledge with. And it just comes from knowing a lot of people in the industry and around the industry. And I guess really knowing that there are a very small number of people who are just really genetically blessed. They've just got everything they need genetically to walk into a gym, like walk past the dumbbell rack once or twice and then just walk out looking better after 6 months than, some other people do after working their butts off for like 10 years. And I guess it sounds a little bit rough, but I think the reality of acknowledging that certain people are genetically gifted, that doesn't mean that we can't all do really well with what we have. Like, I think most people would be surprised with, if we're training smart, if we're taking care of our mental health and emotional health and stress levels and all that kind of stuff, we'd be quite surprised with what we can achieve, though acknowledging that some people are just genetically born to do a certain thing and they just take to it like a duck to water. But then that's a very, very small, like a tiny, tiny percentage of the population. And then there is just so much steroid use right now that it is just crazy. Becoming really well acquainted with the telltale signs of performance-enhancing drug use can help you get really, really clear in your own mind about what you can expect from your own fitness journey. There's an incredible book by Dr. Harrison G. Pope, who's one of the world's leading experts on body image. He wrote this book called The Adonis Complex. And at the end of his book, he was talking about, okay, so what can we do? What can we do about this issue? What can we do about the use of performance-enhancing drugs? And people are going to keep using them. People are going to, even if they're illegal, which they are, people are going to still use them. So one of the best things that we can do is learn to recognize the signs so that we can be absolutely clear about what we're looking at. And if we're looking at someone with a particular physique, they're either, using a performance-enhancing drug, or they might be just investing every single waking moment in training, nutrition, self-care in order to look a certain way. So one of the best things we can do is just get really, really knowledgeable about what's involved in different goals so that we don't expect certain things from ourselves. So we can, right from the start, we know, okay, how much work am I willing to put in? What do I want to do that's within those boundaries of like safe mentally, physically, emotionally, all that kind of stuff? What can I invest? What can I put in? And then what can I expect from that? And just being really clear on that, because right now there's zero transparency in regards to what's involved with different body goals. And as much as I do my best not to talk about body goals too much because of the subject matter that we're talking about, and body goals are quite triggering for a lot of people, at the end of the day, it's often body goals that lead to the situation that we're currently struggling with. So if we were to really rip this thing up by the roots, we'd be looking at from the very start, okay, what's involved in certain body types, without being sold programs by people that promise the world. Like, what can we really expect from a training and nutrition program? What's involved in different things? And just recognizing steroid use as what it actually is, that can be really, really helpful in terms of what we're looking at with body image, especially when we start looking at actors and everything now. Some of the Marvel characters and everything like that, they're just getting crazy. So it helps to be able to walk into the cinema and go, yeah, that's what steroids looks like. So the next time you walk past like a magazine rack and it says, get arms like this person, you know that it's okay, that's not going to come from just a workout.
Yeah, it seems like you're trying to help people make really informed decisions about their fitness and about their health and about what's actually possible for your own body, kind of based on your priorities too. Because these actors may, like you said, may spend every waking moment plus the steroid use. Like, you have a life, you have other priorities, you have other things you want to do. So it's like, you're not saying give up on health. You're saying make the best of your own body within your own life and your own schedule and what's important to you. Remembering that ultimately fitness and stuff is about your health. Like, reframing it so it's not about killing yourself to attain this unrealistic standard. It's about taking care of yourself and showing up as the best version of yourself while also living the rest of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly it, for sure.
I really appreciate everything we've talked about today. I think we covered a lot. I think your perspective is really helpful, and I'd love for people to learn more about you. Can you tell the listeners where they can find you and how they can learn more?
Thank you so much. The best place to find me right now, the most reliable place is on Instagram. It's mkain coaching. That's just MKAIN coaching. And through that Instagram page, you'll be able to get access to my podcast, which is the Kain Coaching Podcast. And those two things are definitely the most reliable ways to see more of what I'm doing and to contact me at the moment.
Okay, perfect. And I'll link both of those in the show description. So thank you so much, Marcus, for coming on the show. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Kathryn. This was really, really great. Thank you so much.
I hope you benefited from that conversation with Marcus. If you enjoy the podcast, I would really appreciate you leaving a review on the platform of your choice. And also subscribe if you haven't already, because it helps more people find the show. If you want more help ending binge eating, you can go to brainoverbinge.com, where you'll find my blog, my online course, and one-on-one coaching and group coaching. If you are interested in my online course, I do want to let you know that starting in the new year, in 2022, the price of the monthly subscription to that course will be going up. It's currently only $11, and it will remain $11 until the end of this year. And everyone that is subscribed before the price goes up in January will keep paying that same $11 per month rate for as long as you're subscribed. So if you've been thinking about getting the course, now is a great time to sign up. It's really an amazing value because there are over 125 tracks at this point, so just a lot of resources to help you on your journey to freedom from binge eating. You can learn more and sign up at brainoverbinge.com/subscribe. Thank you so much for listening today, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. I always want to encourage you and remind you that you have the power to change your brain and live a binge-free life. The Brain Over Binge podcast is produced and recorded by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC. All work is copyrighted by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC, and all rights are reserved. As a disclaimer, the hosts of the Brain Over Binge podcast are not professional counselors or licensed healthcare providers, and this podcast is not a substitute for medical advice or any form of professional therapy. Eating disorders can have serious health consequences, and you are strongly advised to seek medical attention for matters relating to your health. Please get help when you need it, and good luck on your journey. Need more help? You can find all of our current and upcoming options for support at brainoverbinge.com.